Well, congratulations on the upcoming launch of America's National Parks on National Geographic. Just curious to know for you, how did you first get involved in this particular series? I know a little bit about your background, but how did you get involved in this project?
Oh, thank you. Well, I got involved because I work at the production company Wildstar Films. We're based in Bristol, and Bristol in the UK is kind of the global hub. They call it Green Hollywood of wildlife filmmaking. And we're all very lucky and fortunate in this career that means we get to make incredible shows like this. We get to visit incredibly beautiful wild places and hopefully tell their stories. And so I was very fortunate to be at Wildstar Films when this came about. And I think it was just an exciting opportunity to spend a long period of time in each national park and really delve into what makes them special, because I think they all have a headline. We're all familiar with Grand Canyon, but there's more to each of them than meets the eye. And so Grand Canyon is an example. I don't think many people would know that there's this beautifully lush forest with squirrels in it called the Kaibab Plateau. And it was just that's what excited me, that ability to actually do a deep dive and really unpack these places that people might know, but actually don't know that well.
What was the vision for the show going in? And did it evolve? Because it really does cover a lot more topics than I kind of expected from a show called America's National Parks.
I think from the outset, it was always meant to be as comprehensive as possible and not just natural history focused, because as you say, I think most audiences would expect to see mostly natural history, and we wanted to cover the human side of things as well. It was important for us to look at what visitors might experience versus what scientists might, or, if you're more adventurous, what side you might see of the park. And so that was always part of the series, always part of the package. I think how it evolved in the edits is that we were really able to get that mix right, get that balance right between who's telling the story of these parks. Is it the animal characters? Is it human stories? Is it the landscapes? And it was an exciting point to realize that each national park has such a unique story, protected at different times, completely different habitats, completely different species, and they're all part of this same system.
Well, and you mentioned the editing and gathering all the footage. I know anytime there's a documentary, there's so much left on the cutting room floor. What was that process like for the directors, for the editors, to determine what makes it through into the show, and what's worthy of getting a spotlight in this hour that you have for each national park?
I think if you ask the directors, it's a painful process for them. And how it works is they will work with an editor. They will put together various versions of cuts. Exec producers like myself, Dan Rees, and the series producers Ben Wallace and Miles Connolly will do various viewings to say, oh, that's working, that's not working. And to reference the previous point about getting that balance right, I think we had several edits where it weirdly was a bit too wildlife heavy. We were spending a bit too much time with a wildlife character when they weren't really telling us more about the park. And so I think a lot of our efforts in the edit were making sure that we were telling the story about the parks first and foremost. And we had a phrase when we were in the edits that this is a love letter to the national park, and we would keep trying to make sure that we were writing that love letter throughout.
One of the things that I really loved was the inclusion of Indigenous people. It didn't gloss over the fact that before America was what it is today, there were people here, and they used this land. I've only seen 2 of the episodes, but I was curious to know, what were the conversations like around that? Did you work with some of the locals who are descendants of those people to kind of make sure you got that story right?
Yes, I think from the beginning we were very mindful of that, because I think when we talk about landscapes, these landscapes were here before humans, and then obviously early settlers would have used them in a very different way, and we wanted to tell as much of that story as we can. But we weren't a kind of series that was delving into history, but we certainly didn't want to ignore it. And so that thread is throughout all the shows in a variety of ways. And wherever we could, we worked with Indigenous communities, and we try to give them a voice, because that's an important part of the national park system and an important part of its history. And also, I think for the audience, it's important to understand how these aren't just beautiful places. They're not just picture postcard. That is one element. They're incredibly productive, incredibly useful, incredibly important culturally. They've got so many different sides, and it felt only right to highlight those stories.
Another story that gets told throughout, at least consistently through those 2 episodes, is climate change. I was curious, was that a goal going into the show, or was it simply unavoidable because of what you guys were seeing?
I think it's always, we want to represent what we're seeing, and I'm not a fan of just having climate change in a show by just saying it, because if it's not visual, then it feels like you're just saying it. But over the course of filming national parks for, in some cases, a year and a half, it was unavoidable, really, and it did impact our shoots. You know, our crews experienced extreme weather conditions, freak flash floods, things that would impact our animal characters, and that is in some of our stories, like Big Bend National Park and our poor beaver that spent months building its lodge that was wiped away in a day. You know, these were actual real life difficulties. And what we're seeing as wildlife filmmakers over the last 5 years is it's an increasingly common story. Where things were predictable, they're not anymore. When we arrive in dry season, it's rainy. When we arrive in rainy season, it's dry. And so the longer the project, the more relevant it is. And it was relevant in a lot of the national parks because we came up against those difficulties.
That brings up a question about what was the timeline of the series? You mentioned, spending up to potentially a year in some of these places. How long was this project in development? How many different teams did you have to scatter around to get this done on time?
So it's a pretty long project. It had about 6 months or so of pre-production, a year to a year and a half of filming, of production, and then another year of editing. And in terms of teams, what was really interesting about this series was that COVID hit right in the middle of the filming period. And luckily, we were already committed to using American talent. And I think when COVID hit, we were in a good position and we doubled down on that strategy. And so our approach was very much to use in-country American camera ops whenever we could. And I think as well that benefited the series because many of them were locally based to the parks they were filming in. I think some of their emotional connection came through the way they filmed things, in the extra care they took, in their ability to be there at times when other people couldn't. And we ended up with a huge production team as a result. We had a team in Bristol who were obviously looking for stories, researching, looking at footage that came back. And then we kind of had another production team roving the States in all the different national parks. So it was a massive team effort and a really impressive one during what was a difficult time for everyone.
I know that technology is very important to you and that you're always looking for what's new, how can we shoot things differently. Were there any new technologies that you were able to implement on America's national parks that fans of nature documentaries should be looking for, things that they won't have seen before anywhere else?
Well, we're very lucky in this, the time we live in. The tools are just getting better and better. And I think we use pretty much everything at our disposal on America's national parks. Drones, remote cameras, the latest UHD cameras, various underwater systems. I think that the story that comes to mind in my head right now is in Big Bend National Park, the ability to film the Mexican long-nosed bat feeding on the agave plant only happens at night, happens sporadically over the year, maybe twice a year, and we're able to capture it just by moonlight, so without disturbing the animals, we were able to get intimate footage purely through low light camera technology. And it's very special footage because it tells a part of their story that's rarely seen, and enabled us to tell a story that linked back to the park, because without the bats, there wouldn't be the agave plant. Big Bend National Park would be a very, very different park. And without the agave plant, there wouldn't be the bats. So I think it was a nice way to show how interconnected life is, not just within the park, but also to all the animals that migrate to and from them.
Obviously, there's a big name attached to this. Well, a couple big names, but Garth Brooks is the narrator. He also serves as an executive producer. I was curious to know, how does his involvement potentially affect the music? I really enjoyed the scoring on the project.
Oh, thank you.
But did that add a level of pressure that you have someone of Garth Brooks's stature lending his voice and being an executive producer, but then some other musician's going to have to come in and lay down some tracks?
I think that, I mean, first thing to say is Garth is amazing, so down to earth, so collaborative, and I think has elevated the series. And it's been a joy to kind of see how excited he is. I think as soon as we heard his voice on it, we all just had a feeling of, wow, this is it. We've connected these things together, and his input has been truly valuable. I think his input has meant that our composers have worked harder as a result, because they feel that pressure. And our aim was always to have different instrumentation across the parks, for each park to have its own sound. And I hope that comes across, but I know that the composers have worked very hard at that, especially when they found out that Garth was attached. And, you know, so we've got in session musicians, we've really gone to town on the music to match his presence, to match his voice, and also to give the parks their own identity.
I know National Geographic is a worldwide brand. Disney Plus is a streaming platform that's everywhere. So this is going to be seen by a wider audience than just potentially an American looking for a road trip destination who discovers this and decides to make it a long weekend. What is the allure of the national parks for you, being that you're based in the UK? Why are these so appealing to you as someone who's not able to just hop in a car and go if they wanted to?
I think that the United States still has some of the most incredible landscapes and animals found anywhere else on the planet. And I think America's national park system is particularly special because of the time, 100 years ago when some of these parks were protected. It was amazing foresight. And the fact that they're preserved, and many of them are so iconic, I think most people around the world know about the Grand Canyon. And even in the UK, there's still many things that we're all familiar with Yosemite. And I think there's a bigger invite to a lot of the audiences, because the series really does scratch beneath the surface. It really does kind of delve into what makes these habitats unique and special. So yeah, I think it's still got an appeal, hopefully, to a broader audience, and it is family entertainment, which is also educational. So I think it's always good on a platform like Disney Plus to have something that any age can sit down and enjoy, and hopefully come away connecting with the natural world and having a greater appreciation for it.
Thank you so much. I know we're out of time. I really appreciate your time, Anwar. And congratulations again. The series is fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate your kind words. Thank you very much.
Yeah.